Welcome to America's Kitchen Table. I'm Judy Barlow, your host for today and chairman of the Legislation and Research Committee for the National Federation of Republican Women. We are actually on site today down in Orange Beach, Alabama, and we have with us our Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall with us today. General Marshall is here visiting with the law enforcement coordinating committees for their 37th annual conference, and we are glad to welcome him on our show today. Welcome, General Marshall.
Good to see you. And by the way, we get to come to your neck of the woods and show off
the Gulf of America.
Gulf of America.
That's
to
great.
Your audience. That's awesome.
Great. You know, you're down here meeting with the sheriffs and other law enforcement agencies. Let's talk about crime for a few minutes. President Trump just recently introduced federal intervention in Washington, D.C., and he's looking at rolling it out to other cities as well, such as Chicago, New York, and others. You recently, with your office, brought in a metro area crime suppression unit in Montgomery. Tell us about that, what you learned, and some of the results that we could use in other cities across the nation.
Yeah, I think one thing we learned is defund the police doesn't work, right?
No, it does not.
When we talk about what's going on in many of our major cities, a lot of it just relates to the fact that they don't have the numbers of law enforcement officers to be able to do their work. And of course, we have that overlay of the George Soros prosecutors who want to engage more social work than they do holding people accountable. But yet there are times where you have to take additional steps. And Montgomery really was kind of that same concept that we've seen President Trump talk about recently, where the nation's capital truly is what people internationally see of our country, and when they see crime there, it makes them view the United States from that lens. Well, Montgomery's our state capital here, and when we've seen significant rise in violent crime in that city, which we did, then that's a reflection of Alabama as a whole. And so as AG, although people view that job as the top cop, you know, it's not that we're there day to day and working to do sort of criminal enforcement in our jurisdictions, but this is one where we had to act and had really strong sheriff, great leadership from our statewide police, which we call ALEA in Alabama, right. In our office saying that we have to come together, use our resources to supplement and to enhance what was going on with local law enforcement. And we've seen really positive results. In fact, shared that with this community here just yesterday about the ability for us to collaborate and work together. And you know, we've had over 450 arrests, served almost 1,000 warrants for people that needed to be arrested, significant traffic stops which led to the seizure of drugs and illegal guns for felons that were illegally in possession, and we saw a dramatic decrease in the number of violent crime cases that we were seeing in our community. And look, we've already seen the results in D.C., right? I think just the presence of the National Guard there supplementing what local law enforcement was doing sent a message to the bad guys. I mean, when you recede from communities that desperately need help, the bad guys take over. And when you push back, you see good things taking place. And we can go back to really Giuliani's days as mayor in New York City, where he said, we're not going to tolerate even the most minor of crimes, and we're going to be aggressive in the work that we do to enforce our laws. And we saw a dramatic change in New York City. So this isn't new. It's just going back to the core and basics of what law enforcement does. And I think President Trump's been a very strong supporter of law enforcement and of making sure that we're trying to eradicate violent crime. He's already making a result there, and very proud of what we did in Alabama in that effort. You know, tell people when I know the results, it's not just in the numbers. Right. Look, we had a woman bring cookies to our office, right? I mean, that shows you the appreciation, but maybe the most important thing, I had a call from a lady that has lived in Montgomery her whole life, lived in one of the communities that was adversely impacted here, and she said, hey, I feel safe now to get out on my front porch. And that makes you understand that people inherently want to be safe, and what value you can bring in being able to change the dynamic of communities impacts people in a very profound way. It did for this woman, and it did for many other in Montgomery.
You know, and that's all we want for our families is safety, and that's what President Trump ran on, was making America safe again, along with strong again. which our police presence helps to make us strong as well. So,
Yeah, and people want to view it from a partisan lens. There's nothing partisan about being safe.
right.
And one of the things that I think we've seen, and particularly in D.C., is people in those communities that were struggling saying, we welcome the presence of anybody that wants to come and give our communities back to us. And it's not a Republican Democratic issue. It's about community safety and using the resources that we have to bring to bear on that question and allowing people to be able to be safe. Proud of the leadership he's shown there, and really proud of the work that we've done here in Alabama.
That is great, and we appreciate that for our families across the nation. That's one of the things that we asked for when we gave the mandate and we chose President Trump as our next president, was our safety again.
And he's delivered.
And he has delivered.
Yeah.
Promises made, promises kept. Your office has also received a lot of attention recently during the Supreme Court hearing and a subsequent decision in United States versus Committee, and I hope I'm pronouncing that
Yeah.
right. This case involved a Tennessee law, but it was really interesting. Most people don't realize the role that Alabama played in this favorable ruling. So can you talk to us about that? That's a really interesting
And look,
case.
it's one that Alabama took up the mantle and engaged in the fight. I mean, you know this, your listeners don't. I'm a prosecutor. I'm just kind of a guy that loves to get in those battles, don't mind getting a little bit bloody to get the end result. Because uniquely as a prosecutor, you're given the ability to be the voice for others who don't have that voice.
Exactly.
And in this area, it were kids that were dealing with gender dysphoria, legitimate
Right.
mental health concern, but absolutely being subject to experimentation and potentially adverse health consequences down the road from this gender affirming
And we're
care.
talking minors.
Yeah, and a little history there. Alabama was the third state to be able to protect kids, to say, no, we're not going to allow girls at 12 years old to put testosterone shots in their legs once a week, or boys to have puberty blockers, and God forbid that we take scalpels to kids to somehow or another change body parts. We said we're going to take a stand, and really proud of what Alabama did. And we should be a leader in conservative issues because we are a ruby red state. Our constituency gives us the opportunity to lead on those issues, and we need to be able to respond and deliver. But sadly, we saw that when states like Arkansas and Alabama had passed those laws, they were challenged by the liberal left. And look, it is a coordinated effort among liberal lawyers, woke medical organizations, and at this point, the Biden administration,
Yes.
to be able to push back on states that were trying to do the right thing. And we were losing those battles. And part of the reason why we were losing those battles is the lawyers were able to come in and go, well, Judge, we have this international organization called WPATH that's established the standards of care for kids. And all doctors are doing in Alabama and other places are following what national experts and international experts have said is best for these kids. And sadly, those judges did not know at that point in time the true facts, that this truly was one of the greatest medical, legal, and ethical frauds that's ever been perpetuated on the people of our nation as well as the people of the world. Because look, this was a failed European experiment. And so we made the decision in Alabama to say, we're gonna find out the true facts, that we're going to invest the resources and put together the team that's gonna go after and find out what WPATH was doing. We suspected the Biden administration, but had no idea what we were able to truly uncover. And to say that Alabama was going to lead the charge in protecting kids. And interesting, we spent taxpayer money in Alabama. I'd say $500,000 was the initial contract request for us. And that's stepping out on a limb. When I'm looking at you and saying, I'm going to spend your tax money to do this, not a better people to do it for than our kids, right?
Right.
But I knew we were in the right track when a woman stopped me in a grocery store and said, hey, I saw you ask for that money. And I was expecting maybe a little bit of pushback. And she said, whatever it takes to protect Alabama's kids, you go do it. And so knew very much we were on the right track. And so we aggressively engaged in what litigation provides us in discovery to send subpoenas, to take depositions. And maybe one of the greatest compliments that we've received during my tenure as Attorney General is a conservative commentator who follows this across not only the nation and the world, said the greatest mistake of the Merrick Garland time as Attorney General was to sue the state of Alabama over this issue, because we got to the bottom of what was going on, and that is WPATH doctors who not only suppressed research that showed that what they were doing was harmful to kids, was no proven track record, because there's a way to deal with gender dysphoria. It's just not with medical intervention, it's with psychiatric and counselors being able to engage in counseling for kids. But we were able to not only disprove what they were arguing was the science, we were able to get videos and transcripts where they were acknowledging, number one, we don't even know how to explain this to kids and to parents. And they were perpetuating this lie. Look, if you don't do these shots, then your kids potentially are going to kill themselves because they're at higher risk for suicide. And that's been completely disproven. And so we were able to get the WPATH information. We were able to show that activist lawyers were engaging with physicians to say, you need to draft your standards this way because otherwise we can't defend them in court. Lawyers, me included, I don't need to be defining medical care, but yet they were dictating to doctors what they were doing. But maybe the most offensive thing was Rachel Levine. We got emails for when Rachel Levine, when he was assistant head of Health and Human Services, was reaching out, and particularly on an issue about, at least WPATH was going to say there are age limits on when kids can have these surgeries. Rachel Levine reached out and goes, you got to take that away because you're hurting our ability to advance the transgender movement. I mean, how offensive
and that's can that
be the political agenda? Not what's best for kids, but the political agenda. And so from all of the work that we were able to do, we were able to assist other states around the country, because now it's, I think, up to 26 states, everybody of which was involved in litigation. We were able to supplement the efforts of states with the true facts of what was going on, so that judges who before could just blindly accept that maybe WPATH knows what they're talking about, to be able to see absolutely they don't, and they acknowledge they don't, that informed consent doesn't exist in this area, and that's a fundamental premise of medicine. And so we were able to shift the tide. We got a really good decision out of the Sixth Circuit with Judge Sutton, who's a strong conservative jurist, and Tennessee was able to position their case to be able to go to the Supreme Court to be able to defend their law. And what was unique for us, look, I would love for Alabama's case to have gone up because we had the most robust record to be able to show the court what was going on. But what we were able to do through what we call amicus briefs, in our case, the brief that we wrote in support of Tennessee trying to defend their law, was to lay out that factual narrative of what I've somewhat described with you here, so that we gave the court the ability in oral argument to push back directly against the activist lawyers on the other side, where they had to acknowledge that they weren't being truthful, not only about this idea of suicide and that risk for kids, but also the effectiveness in what the research was showing. And you know, what's interesting to me when you look back, somebody's going to write a great book about this, but who would have thought that the author of novels for kids would end up being our greatest advocate to ever rallying in Europe, pushing it back against the insanity of what's been the arguments here and the impact of kids. When Europe is pulled away and we're still there, it shows you we're probably not in a good spot. But when the story's finally written, Alabama's going to play a remarkably important chapter. And look, I had some absolutely amazing lawyers for us here at our team in the AG's office, but also conservative lawyers connected with Alliance Defending Freedom, which you're familiar with, a great organization, and some other conservative friends that stood with us, worked hard, and really, really proud of the work we did in that area. And glad the Supreme Court in Scarmetti said this is absolutely an appropriate way for states to protect and defend kids. We see the value in that, and we are at the Supreme Court level, not even sending it back for more factual findings. We're saying Tennessee acted properly, and these other 26 states acted properly as well.
And that was a huge win.
Huge win.
A huge win for the team. You know, it really was a team concerted effort.
And for kids.
And for kids.
And not only in the United States, but internationally as well.
That is great. Somewhat related to that, there's been a major shift when it comes to Title IX and the integrity of women's sports. Your office has been on the front line defending women's sports. Talk to me a little bit about where we go from here and making sure women's sports stay for women.
Yeah, who would have thought we would have to fight about who's a boy and who's a girl?
Or that conversation.
Right? I mean, yeah, it wasn't. You know, it's interesting. I'll go back a little bit of history. Alabama led the charge to keep the ERA from becoming the 28th Amendment to our Constitution. If Joe Biden with the auto pen wanted to do it, right? Remember that? He's just going out. And the reason why that was so important, if you recall the language of that amendment, it would have talked about the equality of sexes, so that you cannot distinguish and differentiate based on sex. Well, back in the 70s when that was first announced, we didn't have a question about who was a boy and who was a girl. It was as God created us, right? I mean, it was how we were formed, and no one disputed that. It's only recently that somehow or another we've seen gender as some evolving topic that can change by the minute.
Right.
That never knew there was more than one or two genders, and now suddenly people want to say this panoply of possibilities out there. But when Alabama was able to keep that out of the Constitution, it made the argument for those on the transgender side much more difficult. Because if it had become a constitutional right, then the standard and the review the courts would have engaged in would have been very different. And so, look, we had a very proactive legislature in Alabama that made sure that we protected girls here.
Right.
But it goes back to the Obama administration. They tried to open up locker rooms. Republican AGs pushed back, and that fight sort of stopped for a while. President Trump came in and propounded some very common sense regulations around Title IX, which has been a huge success.
Right.
And by the way, if you go back, also a product of the 70s, Democrats and Republicans alike understood what it meant to the definition of sex and the gender and what it was defined. No one would have assumed the argument in 2024 would be what it is now. So, when Joe Biden walked in, I mean, it was like, hold my beer, right? I mean, he was ready to go after that on day one. And while we had a good law in Alabama and other states did the same, when you weaponize the federal government through Title IX and resources to try to change that agenda, then you had to have people that were willing to fight, and really proud of what I and my colleagues across the country were able to do through multiple litigation. We had not only defending women's sports, and proud to see what took place there, but also, again, that integrity of a girls' locker room.
Right.
We've heard the stories,
yes.
Particularly, Riley Gaines has talked pretty passionately about what took place there. And it's why elections matter when you have President Trump. And I had the privilege of being invited to the White House when he signed that executive order about girls' sports. That iconic moment when all those girls were around him.
That was great.
It was awesome.
That was great.
But, while we have won the battle now, it's why we got to get Congress to be able to make sure that Title IX is very clear.
Yes, we do.
About what that definitional section is, because, God forbid we go back the other direction where we were, then that becomes in jeopardy again. And what's interesting to me is, if you look at the polling, this is not, again, somewhat like public safety we talked about earlier. Folks on the left support this idea too. I mean, if you fight so hard to get the protections of Title IX, then you have placed in jeopardy the gains that have occurred during that period when you allow a guy that competed in 11th grade in the male pole vault, and then in the 12th grade comes in and grows his hair a little bit longer and suddenly says he's a girl. That's not right. And I think a majority of Americans agree that that's not right. And so I think there's an opportunity there. I mean, when Gavin Newsom's on our team, right? I mean, that shows you that narrative is flipped. And so my hope is that we can solve this ultimately, not through AGs having to defend and push back against adverse regulations, but let's codify this so that we don't have to fight this battle in the future.
You're right. We do have a piece of legislation that we're watching in the Senate, and Senator Tommy Tuberville introduced that again this year, and it's protecting women in sports and spaces. So we're watching that on a national level as the National Federation of Republican Women, and we do need to codify these. We need to get these laws
and I think
passed.
it's a great opportunity for us in midterm elections in 2026 to remind the country that Republicans are leading on this charge, trying to do the right thing.
You're exactly right.
And it's the Democrats right now that are stopping it.
And we've got to get the Republicans elected in midterms to be able to continue the work and the pace that we're on.
Absolutely.
So you're exactly right. You also went down to the border recently, and I'd like for you to talk about that experience. And once President Trump took office, we've seen immigration enforcement at an all-time level, and there's new things coming up daily on that. So talk to us about that and what you see going on.
Yeah, what Joe Biden said we had to change the law to do enforcement, right? That was
Right.
the argument?
Yes.
We didn't.
No.
We simply had to tell our folks that are there to protect and serve every day, go do your job. To
Right.
liberate them to do what the law allowed them to do. And when you saw, there were 12,000 sort of border cross, I forgot the data. I wish I had thought to bring that with me. But the numbers just have exponentially gone down.
Yes.
And so had a chance to go down to Arizona, and God bless the folks that live down there and what they had to endure
Right.
during that 4-year period. But what I heard from Border Patrol is the shackles are off.
Right.
That we're now able to do what we signed up to be able to do, is secure the borders of this country. It's really sad to see. We saw a remarkable border wall that was built during President Trump's first administration, but so much additional just laying there, just rusting,
Right.
because it wasn't put up and just going to waste when we've already spent taxpayer dollars to have it. Could be able to be used for a very effective purpose. But we've seen dramatic change, and had a chance to not only talk to the Border Patrol agents, but folks that ran local hospitals, local medical institutions that were involved in the local farming community, and talked about the financial impact on them as a result of the failed policies of the Biden administration.
Right.
And, it didn't take some dramatic change in Congress. It took a new leader in the White House that said, law enforcement, do what you signed up to do. And
I back you and I support you.
And they have absolutely turned the corner on what's going on down there, to the point that the cartel's trying to figure out what's next. And let's don't forget that these were people that were coming in many times that were under the wing of the cartel, some actively working for them, but some, we talk about human trafficking, and you've been a great voice about that in our state. These people were being trafficked and subject to making payments back to Mexico for them being able to get over here. And the other sad part of the story is talking to law enforcement there from the state side, is what they were seeing in the loss of life, is folks in very harsh conditions coming across, and they were having to take dead bodies from folks that were trying to cross illegally. And so, look, I'm excited about what is taking place just in flipping the script in President Trump's administration. Now we need to continue to equip what Border Patrol needs to secure the border, and part of building that wall is critically important there. But I think it's also being able to support their mission, and I do feel like that not only the Trump administration doing that, but what you've seen from Secretary Noem through her work at Homeland Security, what you've seen ICE agents being able to do right now and being able to effectively enforce the law. I think all that is part of the process of unwinding what was the insanity of the Biden administration in this area.
It's a whole different landscape now, because we have a commander-in-chief that really wants to make America strong and safe again. So, and he's talked recently about the National Guard troops being called in to the southern states from Texas, Arkansas, Alabama, Louisiana. He's bringing them in to do more work to help with the deportations and also to help on crime. So,
and I'm proud of our states too. Alabama sent National Guard troops over to the border to be able to help supplement what was going on there. And a lot of credit I give to Governor Abbott during the Biden administration years, because Texas was aggressively trying to use what resources were there. Ken Paxton, my colleague over there, helping on that front. And we're willing to wage those battles to try to make sure that they were doing what they could, not only to keep Texas secure and safe, but us too, because we're all border states ultimately in what's going on. And let's don't forget, it's not just the people, it was the fentanyl that was coming across
the drugs
in massive amounts, killing people across our country.
That's right. Well, thank you, General Marshall, for being with us today.
Oh, it's gone so fast. Thank you.
I know it has. We appreciate you coming on and talking with us and giving us updates on the legal aspects. We talked to the senators and congressmen on legislation, but it's always good to see what's happening in our courts and what's happening with our law enforcement as we try to support making America safe again. So thank you.
Thank you.